Hello, this is another one of my videos on this old essay, Sociological Theories regarding the emergence and development of new religious movements, this being the second part of the section on plausibility and millenarianism. So in earlier videos I talked about various psychological theories regarding the emergence of new religious movements. Then I moved on to crisis theories and discussed the various types of crisis that might engender new religious movements, and now I've moved on to talk about ideological contexts, and in particular plausibility and millenarianism. As I said in the previous video, millenarianism remains an ideal form of religiosity to be considered in relationship to crisis. By its clear and radical rejection of the existing order of things, it may be seen as an expression of extreme discontent, the ultimate expression of the perseverance of human hope in the midst of adversity and hopelessness. The occurrence of millenarian movements is linked to their plausibility, however. Millenarian movements presumably only occur when those involved in them find the urgent expectation of a supernaturally derived worldly utopia to be a plausible proposition. As I said in the previous video, if you want a general reference on millenarianism, do see Catherine Wessinger's collection of essays in her Oxford Handbook of Millennialism. As I said in the previous video, millenarianism is much more common in the Western religious traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam than in the Eastern ones of Hinduism and Buddhism. Having said that, it's not just a matter of a stronger articulation of millenarian ideas in the West and a weaker articulation in the East. There are also variant metaphorical bases for the conceptualization of the historical process, which may be held to restrict or encourage these differences in ideas. The linear conceptions of time held within a highly historically conscious Western religion being anticipatory of the idea of a definite end and consummation of the historical process, literally the end site, the end of time, whilst the cyclic conceptions found within Hinduism and Buddhism describe a world which is seen as caught in an endlessly repeated cycle of death and regeneration. Similarly, at an individual level, whilst in the West the predominant idea has been that after death each human soul has ultimately received some form of once and for all divine judgment, traditionally in Christianity and Islam as a collective last judgment, often this worldly, a conception which again focuses attention on an end site. In the East, the prevailing concept of successive reincarnations pending individual salvation has focused attention away from the historical process. More generally, the two meta-traditions diverge in their emphases vis-à-vis worldly activity. The activist attitude towards the world fostered by the normative theological dualism and ethical prophecy of the Western religions, contrasting with the relative passivity fostered by the monism and exemplary prophecy of the East. The question of intellectual plausibility is linked at a wider level to that of rationality, a question quite commonly discussed in connection with millenarianism. Thus, to a number of sociologists and anthropologists, the salvationist fantasies, the term is nomen currens, of millenarianism have been regarded as indicating a fundamental irrationality on the part of those who subscribe to such movements. Of course, during the periods of European and American colonial expansionism, administrators and missionaries were often confronted by the hostility and alien religiosity of the non-European peoples whom they sought to subdue or subjugate, millenarianism appearing as a particularly bizarre example. In attempting to explain these movements, recourse was generally made to racialist stereotypes and crude theories of psychopathology. Millenarian movements were thus generally regarded as instances of religious fanaticism or actual madness, as with the example of various so-called mad mullahs confronted by the British. More sophisticated versions of such theories were later adopted by some social scientists. It's by no means clear always in what sense millenarian movements are regarded as irrational, and the concept of rationality itself comprises a number of different meanings. Of course, by the standards of contemporary scientific thinking, the expectation of an imminent, supernaturally derived utopia would not be considered rational, even less to believe that some form of magico-religious ritual action might have some role to play in the attainment of such a goal. This is not a valid standard of assessment, however. That particular beliefs and actions may appear irrational to modern social scientists by no means implies that they will also so appear to those who actually adhere to them. The argument is now established that within their particular culturally bounded frames of reference, variant systems of thought may be perfectly rational in their own terms, albeit that there is disagreement as to whether and how such relative rationality is to be distinguished from the rationality underlying modern science. Thus, for example, the seemingly bizarre behavior and belief of various Melanesian cargo cultists may be explained as desperate searchings for more and more effective ways of understanding and modifying the environment. Accordingly, Melanesians, lacking knowledge of the processes of production and provenance of much desired European goods, and seeing cargo brought from places unknown and handed over to local Europeans who did no actual work themselves but merely handed over pieces of paper in return, constructed and even tested their own theories of explanation. Might the replication of European behavior and artifacts secure the Melanesians' share of this cargo? Hence the bamboo radio aerials, the marching, and the pseudo-clerical procedures. Europeans clearly possess some knowledge which enabled them to benefit from cargo in a way that was denied to Melanesians. Might this knowledge be found in the Bible, the only part of Western culture that the Europeans seemed eager to teach them? Or if not there, then perhaps in some pages which had been torn out of the Bible by Europeans, wishing to prevent Melanesians attaining their due shares of worldly rewards. To maintain, as Lucy Mair, that there is an objectively and subjectively universal distinction between rational non-mystical activities and irrational religious activities, which the actors themselves know to be ineffective in the achievement of their temporal goals, is to apply a secular rationalist bias to societies and cultures in which such a distinction is meaningless. That particular people have technical knowledge of non-mystical means-end relationships in, say, horticulture, does not mean that they will necessarily contrast such relationships with perceived religious means-end relationships. Knowledge of technique is not the same as the theoretical knowledge of why the technique works. They may, of course, make some distinction between what are perceived as symbolic and non-symbolic acts, between, say, symbolic aggression and non-symbolic aggression, but that is a different matter and does not necessarily reflect any dichotomy between rational and irrational activities. To accept that different peoples have developed different rational explanations for the ways in which their respective worlds work is not to accept an infinite relativism. Neither within nor between cultures are all explanatory schema equally rational. Adapting Loudon, we may say that within any given social or historical context, rational choice between socially available theories of explanation consists in choosing that theory which provides the most adequate solution to the empirical and conceptual problems recognized as important within that context. Of course, such theories must be socially available. In complex societies, including newly complexified societies of conquest, social divisions greatly restrict such availability. Given a worldview dominated by unscientific, magico-religious conceptions, then unscientific, magico-religious solutions to problems may be perfectly rational, whereas given more scientific worldviews, they are not. For example, in various parts of the world, people have had a belief in magical invulnerability to bullets. For the Magi in German East Africa in the period 1905-1906, or Saya San in British Burma in 1930-32, in both cases rebels believed that they possessed magical invulnerability to bullets. This was not necessarily an irrational belief in terms of their own native belief systems, albeit that it became less credible after being put to the test. But by contrast, for the followers of Sir William Courtenay at the Battle of Bossington Wood in England in 1835, even allowing for the gulf between popular and scientific cultures, the question must at least be raised. Indeed, that there is at least a difference in the intellectual plausibility of this belief between these different contexts is suggested by the great disparity in the numbers involved in those particular movements, whereas the East African and Burmese rebels threw themselves in their thousands in massed charges over open ground against the guns of their colonial overlords. Courtenay's pathetic following in England numbered only 50 or so. So I'll finish this section there. Many thanks to you for listening, and particular thanks to my patrons for their kind support and encouragement, without which I wouldn't be able to make these videos. You're very welcome to support my channel if you wish. Please do like, comment and share on the videos. Subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos. Ring the bell button. Patreon and PayPal links below if you want to provide practical support. Next week we'll move on to societal contexts. Have a good day.